Hello there, kia ora. Did you know that there's an election on this year? Or that you might be in one of the parts of the country that will get no media coverage for that election? And that campaigning's actually already begun in ways that you might not necessarily realise, and mainstream media is complicit in some of those campaigns. So let's start with the obvious here. There's a local body election happening all over the Motu on October 11. Sure, that is ages away at the moment, and the only places that are going to be missing out are Tauranga because they had theirs last year. But part of our problem is the fact that the election is so far away and there's a lot of stuff that happens between now and then. And we have a shrinking field of local media to be able to cover everything, which means that we're seeing fewer local media outlets and less ways of getting people to pay attention to local body elections. Last year, we saw NZME, the owners of the notoriously left-wing range of media, the New Zealand Herald and News Talk ZB, shut down 14 local newspapers, citing an inability to get funding from advertising from an audience that they helped talk into voting for the political parties that have sunk the country into the worst economic recession since the early 90s. Such an awful, completely unforeseeable issue. Anyway, the closure of those 14 papers covered huge parts of Aotearoa. These included areas like Waipa, Tairāwhiti, Stratford, the Central North Island Lake District, National Park, and a heap more. On top of that, in 2018, Stuff also sold or closed 28 local papers, and their absence creates something that we call news deserts, areas without local news. When you watch a major news bulletin on TV or stream it online or see news headlines from major publications, chances are that they're going to focus on population-dense areas because the news has more impact on more people there, or the advertising money will have more impact on people there. And the media outlets themselves are usually based there, and it's, cheaper than traveling up and down the country. Good local journalism, though, focuses on local issues and how it impacts communities that you won't find on the 6 p.m. news every night. They find and identify social issues that unite and divide their communities, and often represent a local voice who can campaign and argue for local change with organisations and elected officials. And all of this is important to help local democracy and hold local elected officials to account. On the national grand scheme of things, the news that the Thames Coromandel District Councils decided not to join the national government's much-lauded Water Done Well scheme because of a lack of modelling information being made available to them might not make big waves that get seen on nightly 6 p.m. news bulletins. But it is important for locals to be aware of. There's still consultation that needs to happen because the council has until September this year to lock down a plan. And without local media to cover this and keep local communities informed, it becomes a far more difficult task to reach people within local communities. Social media has only got so much reach and impacts some communities more than others in very different demographics to traditional media. And examples like this are occurring all over the country. As we go into local election season, local news coverage plays a key role in helping the public be aware of who's running, or even that there's an election on. Local elections, for example, often don't get coverage on larger media outlets until it's directly related to the larger population centres. Now, media bias and presentation constraints definitely play a part on what gets presented. Now, for example, there's a very clear history in recent months over the Post in Wellington vilifying cycle lanes and Mayor Tory whānau while platforming without reservation right-wing councillor voices and National Party lackeys. And this is from the same person who's now in charge of one of our 2 free news broadcasts at 6 p.m. But how often do you hear from councillors from other regions in the Post? Other than when they do something really horrible and newsworthy, like Hamilton's Andrew Bidder, you usually don't get them into mainstream media because it's not possible or necessary to show local perspectives on a national scale. It's why you might hear about Bidder insulting disabled people and refusing to apologise, while the Oreti Community Board Chair Katie Allen lying about her dog dying to get out of paying registration fees on the animal, along with her other Voices for Freedom talking points that she brings to the role after leading a coup to overthrow her predecessor, well, that's probably never going to make national news. This year, we have already seen fluff pieces from media around local elected officials, which are really summer filler, such as Northland Media's focus on local mayors. Summer filler fluff is not uncommon in media, which you get titles like this popping up at the same time they're running stories like this on why people should trust the media. It's almost like they can't understand why people aren't trusting the media over summer in particular. But, fluff is not uncommon. And these stories that popped up about Northland mayors, in isolation, they could be kind of problematic, but if you take them on board as 3 fluff filler pieces talking to the 3 mayors, it's a little bit different. It starts off, though, with Kaipara's mayor, a refugee from the illegal Wellington protest, who wants to not only minimise the use of any ta'ao Māori within the region, but also ignore the environmental science around mangroves in the local harbour that he so loves to fish in. And he sees himself as the Trump of the North. The media didn't push back on his claims, didn't question his drive or decision-making process, but they also didn't do that when talking to Far North District Mayor Moko Te Pānea about his summer camping plans, or Voices for Freedom-linked Whangarei Mayor Vince Kokorillo when talking about his penchant for wearing vests. But as of October 11, well, some of those media outlets are going to have not been able to really dig into those issues. Are they going to have the resources to highlight those negative impacts of Jepson's policies on council-iwi relationships, or environmental outcomes, or tourism? Are they going to have the ability to investigate how Far North Council's ageing water infrastructure, some of it coming up to a century old, is expected to keep going or be funded to be replaced in a model that would offer far fewer benefits than what was proposed by the last Labour government? Is media up there going to be able to dig into the influence of far-right media personalities on local election coverage in Whangarei, or why the phrase "Meri kira meheti" upsets those particular influences so much? Because if they don't, then what voters find when they Google their incumbent mayors at election time are filler puff pieces. And you can bet some elected officials from all over the country will be hoping that their Google results are filler pieces, and don't dive deep into the mahi that they've been doing and the results of their decisions. There are some, for example, who are running online Telegraph forums where they cosplay as Nazis and then show up and talk about the environment at work. Look, I want to see people get out and vote this year's local body elections, and I want to see local media succeed. But it is far more difficult to see one happening without the other. Our local media has a valuable role to play in keeping us informed and keeping our local elected officials on their toes. And while it is naive to expect any business to keep going when it can't turn a profit, even media, it is so important that we all work to make sure that we don't start living in news deserts. All those sort of people who lie about dogs dying or happily consider themselves the Trump of the North, they'll find a way to get their motivated voting bases out there, keeping them in the decision-making seat. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.